And we're live.
This is Plant Daddy Podcast, serving you intersectional horticulture. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Steven.
Hello, everyone. In our last episode, we talked about indestructible houseplants, which we called the holy grail of internet plant content. In that episode, we talked about the plants that are most likely to appear in lists of recommendations, and these were based on 10 different sources I found on Pinterest when searching for indestructible houseplants. What we found was that many plants that show up regularly sometimes have a disconnect between the ease of indoor culture and the publication providing quality growing information, and there were a lot of just general problems that we had, but we also found a lot of positives that were unexpected. So Stephen, what did you think about what we discovered?
So, yeah, like you're saying, it's kind of a mess out there, but there are
Yeah.
good tidbits in there. I think for me, like we said, we had some surprises like why, the hell would you have English ivy in your home? But I mean,
Some people
then
are into it.
yeah, and then but then I think there were some kind of good things that I've experienced in my own growing, like certain plants that I, get at IKEA that won't die, etc.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it was mixed, but hopefully we got some truths sort of bubbling to the surface here.
Yeah, so we're going to get back to that in a moment because in today's episode we want to synthesize down what we talked about last episode by providing you with some solid recommendations that are based on our own combination of research and experience. But before we do that, how's your week been, Stephen?
Mine's been great. So over the weekend, I had the Washington Carnivorous Plant Club group meeting, which I, have been recommending my plant clubs essentially to, everybody.
It's a good one.
Yeah, it's a great one. We had a lot of free plants and just a good time. So I learned some things, and I got like a bucket of free Darlingtonia. So I'll be giving those to friends. If you're in the Seattle area, maybe ping us. I really have a lot. So,
And I know that this is probably the most mentioned plant on our
I
podcast
know
so
for
far.
some reason. I mean, I'm into them this year, but then I
Yeah.
mean, I get 10 additional ones. That was unplanned. So
But I know that we have mentioned that we'll have a whole episode devoted to them, but this afternoon we were literally sitting down planning out when we'll do that because that's an exciting plant that I think
soon we
want to talk
promise.
about. Yeah. Same with Nepenthes.
Yeah. So how about you? How was your week?
It was good. The weekend was nice and calm, nothing too crazy. But I am really excited because our friend Miles at Seattle Plant Store has a shipment that came in today of a plant that I've been searching for at least 3 years. It has been one of the darlings of Pinterest and Instagram. Everyone who's cool who has plants on Instagram and Pinterest has one.
A multi-year search. I am curious now.
I actually do already have one of these.
What? Okay, that was.
So this is kind of a letdown. It's Anthurium clarinervium. You should look this up right now because it's one of the most beautiful aeroids. This is a plant that you are definitely familiar with if you have been on social media looking at plant stuff recently. And by recently, I mean like the last 5 years. This plant has thick, cardboard textured, heart-shaped leaves that are a deep, velvety emerald. And they have this really fantastic, glistening white veining. And as the plant grows more mature, this veining becomes more prominent, it becomes more elaborate. The young plants will show hints of it, and I do have one very expensive, very small plant that I bought off of a seller on Etsy a few months ago. And it's been doing okay. It lost the leaf that was growing when it was shipped. It just didn't handle the transplant and shipping shock well. So it's down to 3 leaves. They're the 3 older ones. And I've been keeping it fairly well watered in really high humidity, as high as I can really provide. It's growing with my orchids. And it's not been doing much, but I recently checked and it's growing roots. So Miles has a source that he just bought some plants that were a really good sale because they were mature with like fully marked leaves. The plants are small. They're like not well divided or anything, but they are mature and they are ready to like take off and be happy, healthy in a brightly indirect lit, high humidity home with consistently warm temperatures. So this is a plant that by the time you're hearing this, he won't have any anymore. Like he's probably going to
Forget
sell
that,
out of them
yeah.
like within a couple of hours of him putting them on Pinterest or well, he probably uses Instagram more for his marketing. But like this is a fantastic plant and I almost feel like I want to tweet about it or put it on Instagram for him so that people know about it. But
So,
yeah.
how much would you expect these to be at this point? Like,
Well,
what your sense of the market is? I'm curious. I don't know much about
so
this.
if you were to buy a plant like this off of eBay, you'd probably be paying over $100 starting bid for like a plant this size,
Okay.
and then the shipping would be like another like 27 to 50 some dollars. I These are just rough numbers, but it would be fairly expensive. The auctions usually go really high on these plants because they're slow to propagate and
Oh,
they're not super easy either. They're a little bit tricky to get to perform well and for the leaves to grow really beautifully and to show off their like full potential. So I think that the market has far more demand than it does supply, so they can set whatever price they want for those. I know that Pistol's Nursery down in Portland was like literally the only place that had them a few years ago, and they just had tiny little plug sizes that were selling for actually like less than $20, I believe. It was a really good deal. But they sold out. They never got them back in stock. I tried getting in touch with them to see if they could like special order, let me know when new ones would be in. But I think that the market is just so hot for them right now that it's unrealistic to expect to find one in a garden store or even specialty nursery shop right now. So the fact that the Seattle plant store has them, even if for a hot second, is exciting. But as soon as I get that plant, I'm going to pot it up in a beautiful pot, probably something that's very white and simple so that the leaves show off beautifully. And then I'm just going to like mist that thing with holy water like twice a day.
so this is a confirmation that you are getting one.
Oh yeah. Yeah, like
Okay.
like when Miles
Because a minute ago you were talking about the babies you had, and now it's
Oh yeah.
moved on to
So I already
like
have a small one, but when Miles was putting together the wholesale order, he was like, "Can I get one for you?" And I was like, "Yes, please."
nice.
Yeah, this is a great plant. I'm very excited about it, having a mature one, so that I get the immediate impact that the little baby that I am trying to grow up
Yeah.
is not providing for a couple years.
But as we said, you can't have this. Okay, so sit there, pine, be jealous.
Yeah,
And then you can
if
check.
you were here with us when we record this a couple of weeks prior to hearing it, this would be
Yeah.
useful information.
Okay.
So yeah, do you have anything else you want to share, Stephen?
No.
Okay, so before we dive into our topic, I just want to remind everybody, like I do every episode, that we can be found on all of the social medias like Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Pinterest as Plant Daddy Podcast, and online at plantdaddypodcast.com. We would also love to hear from you if you contacted us by email at plantdaddypodcast@gmail.com. So, like we mentioned last episode, we've all seen the articles and infographics that just basically flood your plant social media, and they all proclaim that they have definitive listings of beginner-friendly, low-maintenance, possible-to-kill houseplants. And this is something that you're so familiar with by now that you probably have opinions on it just like we do. And we found that while there were a good number of plants that we just would never recommend that came up repeatedly on these lists, there were actually some that were really promising for new plant growers.
Yeah, and there's always a diversity of experiences here, right? Like some people, can't grow the plants that are so-called easy plants, right? Some people will have amazing luck with something that, is challenging even for experienced growers.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Matthew, when you're plant shopping, what to you is an indestructible plant?
I think that the best way to tell if a plant is gonna do really well is typically, but not always, the price, and also the availability. If you see a plant that is like pretty cheap and it's everywhere that sells plants, I think that you can pretty well guess that it is easy to propagate, it's inexpensive and quick to grow, and because this makes them such great choices for propagating in greenhouses for consumers, like the pothos plant or the dracaena plants or a lot of the philodendrons, like most of the foliage plants at Home Depot are really easy to grow. And that trait carries over into the home environment, even though the suppliers who are producing these obviously have ideal conditions. The propagating greenhouses are going to be like the best way to get growth. But you're going to have pretty good luck with them in your home as well. On the other end of that kind of general rule of thumb that I apply is that expensive or plants that are pretty uncommon to encounter, those ones are often going to be slower to grow. They are probably more challenging to propagate. They might not grow as rapidly so that you have less plant material to propagate. They also tend to require more care in the greenhouse, whether that's temperature control, humidity control, and all of this together makes the plant more expensive to produce. It might also be because the plant is more mature, and the price at that point just reflects the prolonged care that it took to raise to that point in a propagation greenhouse. But it's pretty safe to assume that the price is a really good comparison to how challenging and hardy it might be.
Yeah, so I kind of take this to mean like, all right, the typical selection at, for example, Home Depot, right? If you are looking at a sub $10 plant,
Yeah.
it's typically going to be easy, right? For like easier than, I guess, gosh, specialty plants maybe at a specialty store. That'd probably
Yeah.
be the comparison,
Like
right?
if you're looking at like a 10-inch potted plant with another 10-inch potted plant, one of them is $15. That's a good deal. But if one of them is $15, that's going to be a cheaper, or well, sorry, it'll be cheaper to produce, easier to grow than an equivalently sized type of plant that might be like $50 in
Yeah.
its same sized
Yeah,
container.
yeah, I think this is generally very true. Um,
Now, there are times though where it's very easy to grow a plant in a greenhouse setting and then produce it for people to buy for beautiful like flowers typically, but those plants are not going to thrive, they're not going to do well because they're out of a greenhouse. And so those are ones that Miles has mentioned earlier. I don't remember what he called them. It's something like a commercial vegetable crop or something that basically
oh,
indicates it's a potted plant that's not intended to be kept long. So those ones might be cheap, but a lot of the large palm trees that you can buy really cheaply at Home Depot, those ones are not going to thrive inside because they need more water, they need more light, they need more heat, they need more space than any home can provide. So they'll just die for you even though they're cheap. So there are some times where that's not quite correct.
yeah. Okay.
We'll actually get to that later
hmm
because I have some more thoughts that I want to share and some other plants that I want to not recommend. Um,
Yeah, but still generally to sum this up, it's like, you're going to walk into Home Depot if something is $10 versus something that maybe for some reason they have like a $60 plant there. Generally, right? Like very generally speaking, not every time, of course. Like the $10 one is probably going to be easier to grow. So, or hey, just comparing Home Depot to like a specialty orchid shop,
yeah,
the ones at Home Depot are generally going to be easier. So I think this is just like our step one. Okay, you get
yeah.
there. Is it wildly expensive? Probably not as easy.
And I'm also
But
not
yeah.
saying any of this to encourage you to buy the cheapest plants you can find because
hmm
there is actually a lot of value invested in buying quality plants that are well grown instead of just the cheapest produced ones. So, like, take all this with a grain of salt. But
Yeah.
as you kind of see more and more struggles and successes in your own houseplant uh, life, like we have, I think that I can say that the most expensive plants I've ever bought have been the more challenging.
Okay.
Um,
So
yeah.
yeah, like, so to sort of speak generally, in the next step wise, so like, what makes a good houseplant overall, you think?
Well, I think that ideally the perfect indoor houseplant is one that thrives under the same conditions that you personally maintain in your home. So this means that an ideal houseplant is going to vary from person to person and from home to home. I know that a lot of plants are going to offer success for a lot of different home environments. So one of the best ways to pick a good houseplant is to pick one that can tolerate a wide range of typical home environments. And so things that are a little tricky when it comes to plant needs. Now, I'm not saying that these aren't good house plants, but I am going to say that it makes it a little trickier. Is if they need specific temperature parameters that are outside of like your TV watching climate. So I think that you'll probably most readily encounter Christmas cactus and orchids that are ones that need specific temperature parameters to flower, and people have luck with those, but if you don't observe them, you'll just have a foliar plant. And there's also quite a few ones that aren't going to thrive very well unless it's particularly warm, so you might just have to expect that it's only going to grow in the hottest months of your summer. So I found that lists that talked about the way that the plants that they were including needed their temperatures to be set, it was pretty bland. It was like, keep this plant above 60 degrees. Well, yeah, if it's in your living room, like it should be.
Yeah.
But what was useful was when they mentioned if a plant really likes heat, because it is pretty easy to be able to find like a little microclimate in your home that offers something like that. And similarly, find somewhere that gets a little colder in the night for orchid cactus or the Christmas cactus or orchids in general, because they're also going to appreciate that. So that's like one of those things that makes it a little trickier. I also think that it's pretty useful to be able to make an informed choice about the conditions that you have so that you can pick a houseplant that's going to thrive in that location you have in mind.
Typically in a home, maybe you would have light. I mean, you're talking about typically one window, light 4 hours a day, maybe of light.
I'd say that for apartment people like us, you don't have light coming from all sides of the building you live in.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, like, if you live in a house, that's a lot easier. But
But I would argue, even in a house, right, you're not going to be moving it around. Or maybe you have a sunnier side, right? But I feel like you're
yeah,
never really full sun unless you're like a field. Not full, but
yeah, but like a south-facing
okay. And
window is the closest to full sun that you can get. So, um,
so,
at least for those of us in the northern hemisphere, north windows get no direct sunlight, south windows get direct sunlight all day long, and then east gets it in the morning, west gets it in the evening.
yeah. So it's like part of the day there's
Yeah.
some lit, some lit window.
Yeah, east
Um,
tends to be like the preferred window for most plants.
really?
Yeah, because
Wow. I just don't grow typical plants
well,
or
you
something.
also all of your natural light comes from the west. But all of mine face like just slightly north of like due east. And the reason that that's better than west in a really blanket way is that you get sun in the cooler part of the day.
Yeah, it makes sense.
If you have delicate plants on a west facing window, they might burn even if they get less overall light than the same plants on an east facing window.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So humidity wise, I was reading this recently, and I think I already forgot the figure, but I want to say the typical home was 30 to 50%, and that was in the United States.
Yeah.
So
And
okay, that's
I think that that is even on par with like most homes in the world.
see, I wonder about that because I feel like this is a sort of Western style insulated home.
Okay, well, I definitely did just show my my like Western culture bias because yeah, like home humidity and conditions are going to vary dramatically in the part of the world that you are, but for most places that are using indoor climate control, Typically like that 30 to 50 range, I believe is what is sort of considered like optimal.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, I was listening to On the Ledge, one of our favorite podcasts, and they were describing how British homes, I think a guest they had recently said that most homes were around 30%.
And see, that matches my home in certain types of the year. I have a couple humidity meters that I bought when I first started keeping sundews and first started keeping nepenthes in my house. So I have a fairly good read on it. And for us, we have a much drier summer season, so it's been
Yeah.
less humid in my house. But yeah, that sounds right to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The natural humidity in my apartment is like really thrown off because I have so many plants in it, and I also have a humidifier, and I do a lot of plants on tray gravels. And in fact, I have a whole area
Mm-hmm.
that there's photos on Instagram where my orchids are growing like on a thick layer of expanded clay pellets that have water drained below them
Yeah.
just for that ambient humidity. So during the summer, working as hard as I can to keep it above 50, like it never reaches 60. Like
Yeah, I'd be impressed.
yeah, like I need to close all my windows and doors and like just
And I mean,
run
you have a
boiling pots of water.
humidifier, and
Yeah.
you have, I mean,
The humidifier doesn't make that much of a difference.
really?
It only sways it
Oh,
a couple percentages, and it only really sways it on that half of the apartment.
okay.
Like typically low 40s, kind of at the driest end. If it's a rainy day, I might get above like 65% humidity indoors. Winter, though, when I keep my windows closed, my apartment is regularly like 60 to 70% humidity, which is borderline uncomfortable.
Yeah,
But
and so I was reading about this like a week ago too. Not to call Matthew out, but I think it's like the optimal mold humidity is something like 65 to 70.
so I happen to
So,
know that this is true. Not because of reading this or doing anything scientific, but my larger potted plants, like my monstera and my lady palm, they get like mold growing on the outside of their
oh,
pots.
really?
So I regularly, like every couple of weeks, I take them to the bathroom and I wash the plant down to get rid of all the mold spores, and I spray the outside of the pot with diluted bleach, and I just like do this regularly because like to keep the humidity as high as you want to keep your orchids, ferns, and begonias happy, the mold is also thrilled, and then your allergies get bad, and then one of your house rabbits develops a sneeze. So,
Okay, that's its own bonus episode. Okay.
when
And
Finn
yeah,
sneezed a lot,
this is just a long-winded way of saying that the easiest houseplant is mold. Okay?
and we're just,
Surprise, shock,
yeah,
ending.
if you are on Google, you'll know that mold is a fungi, but this is fine.
It's like the ninth time I think I've said that exact thing.
Yeah, it's
But
fine
maybe
though.
one of these days I will catch it. Okay, it's anyway.
But
So
basically,
yeah,
like, yeah, what I think we're saying is that
yeah,
you
couple
don't want
hours
to
of
have,
light.
yeah,
Oh, yeah, so couple hours of light, 50-ish% humidity, 30, 50. Temperature wise, I would say what? 65 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit.
yeah. That's going to be pretty comfortable for most people. My apartment, because of the grow lights that I have and because of the way that it sits, I think probably stays more like 70 to 80,
Okay.
which can be a bit warm. And that also kind of gives me problems for getting my orchids to rebloom sometimes, which, you know, if I want to get them to do that, they need to get down to like 60 to 50 degrees sometimes.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, like that's pretty typical for most homes.
Yes. So under these conditions, what is going to thrive?
Okay, so in our most like general indoor home conditions, the plants that I'm going to recommend to you, just without any question, I think you're going to be successful. Get out a pen and paper because now I'm just going to list some stuff. The Chinese evergreen, Aglonema. This is great for a lower light area. Aloe,
Aglonema.
yeah,
Okay.
Aglaonema. We're not going to spend this much time on all of them. You'll also have really good with aloe if you have a bright windowsill. This particularly likes a really bright spot. It's called cast iron plant, but its genus name is Aspidistra. And this plant comes in a variegated, a solid green, and also one that has little white flecks on the leaves like stars. And it's called cast iron plant because it is so damn sturdy and hardy. It can actually grow outdoors year round in our 8B climate, but everywhere else it can be kept as a house plant. It's really beautiful and it grows very slowly, but it looks great. I also think that the spider plant, which is Chlorophytum comosum, is an exceptional old school looking plant that thrives in moderate light with ample watering. You'll also have really good luck with the jade plant, Crassula ovata, in a brighter windowsill. Some of the ones that are going to do well just as general indoor foliage plants include the Dracaena, which there are many types that are all different sizes with different kinds of leaves. These include the dragon tree and the corn plant are two of the names that you'll see those with. Some of the aroids that are going to be particularly ideal for you are the pothos, Epremnum
Thanks.
yeah, Orium.
Okay.
Epipremnum aureum, the pothos plant.
Oh, okay. I'm
Yeah.
like, wait, is that a different one?
No,
Okay,
no,
thanks
it's
for
the same
clarifying.
one. That one is going to be like your ideal draping vine, but you also have really good luck getting draping vines with philodendron scatens, which is also called the heartleaf philodendron. Some of the more
Okay.
upright philodendrons include Moonlight, Prince of Orange, and Congo. These are all fantastic, and I have to recommend the Monstera deliciosa in the aroid group.
And some of these, okay, some of those philodendrons back there that you just mentioned, they're
Yeah.
not super common, right?
Some of these
to
are a little bit
purchase.
more rare, but they're popular enough that they're showing up in places
Okay.
that you wouldn't have found them 3 years ago.
Okay.
So you'll really be impressed with almost all the philodendrons. I know that there were differing opinions when I mentioned the ficus genus as being one of my favorites, but Ficus elastica, the rubber tree, is just a really dependable indoor plant. I have had them my whole life, and in fact, the one that I have now, well, two of them. One of them is one of Brian's houseplants, actually. Once upon a
Brian
time,
has a house plant?
right? So
My mind is blown.
for our listeners who don't know, Brian is my partner, and he has no interest in plants at all. And like the 1 year that he had his own apartment, that we knew each other, I helped him find a fiddle leaf fig, a yucca plant, Arabian jasmine, an India rubber plant, and a sansevieria. And he cared for them. And when we moved in, all of them were alive except for the jasmine. And right now they're all still alive. So Brian has like 5 houseplants.
Wait, so Brian has houseplants that you helped him buy.
Yeah. And he doesn't take care of them.
So I was right. All right.
Yeah.
So
Okay. I think. But anyway, what I'm saying is these are plants that like even Brian can't kill. But
yeah. So I was gonna say, like what you've said so far, maybe you don't recognize, these names, right? Because really, a lot of these are regional names. There's like different names from different eras. I feel like even like your grandma may have called this something different.
Well, the
But
Monstera is a great example of that. Back when, like, my grandma would have been buying this plant for her Queen Anne Hill apartment to watch the 1962 World's Fair build
Wow.
the Space Needle. I come from this city. She would have called that a split leaf philodendron.
Oh, okay.
But now we call the split leaf philodendron typically Monstera or like Swiss cheese plant because the split leaf philodendron is also a different species of true philodendron instead of in the Monstera genus. So like you'll see that name applied everywhere, but common names are rough. So
yeah, but
Yeah.
my point is like you're hearing all these different names. Really, all of these, if you Google these, or maybe you know them, maybe you don't, right? I guarantee you're going to recognize these just from being in homes,
Yeah.
any businesses. These are kind of these plants that you see everywhere for these very reasons. Like these are pretty tough in pretty varying environments, within our general parameters.
You are
indoors.
going to know these plants. The last ones that I'm going to round out my list of just buy these plants if you need somewhere to start. The Pilea peperomoides. It is fantastic.
Yeah.
I bought a start of mine years ago, before they were popular, before they were in the States, from a seller in the Netherlands. And so I've had this plant now for years. And the whole time I had it, I was just flabbergasted that they weren't literally everywhere for $5 because that is how easy to grow and propagate they are. They readily produce tons of babies that if you don't remove them, they will swarm your apartment.
Yeah,
Like,
it's basically I have a
yeah.
bowl of them they're just filling up
They're
essentially.
fantastic. I feel
Yeah.
like everyone should have one, and I feel like nobody should have paid for it because they should just come from a friend.
Yeah.
But yeah, so get a friend who has one of these and get some Pilea peperomoides. I also really like the staghorn ferns. They do really, really well as an indoor fern.
Yeah, and I think I reacted this way in the last episode even, but I was like, really?
Yeah,
Huh.
they're like
And
one of my favorites, and we're going to have a whole episode about them because I have gotten really interested in mounting them. And my friend John, who you've met, I believe,
I think so.
he is a plant daddy who I think I also can claim a little bit of credit for him going on this route. I think he always had this inclination, but I think that I just kind of like pushed him over the edge a bit. He wants to mount his staghorn fern, and I haven't told you this, but we're going to do an episode where we talk about staghorn ferns and we help him mount his.
Okay, great.
Then to give you like my last couple of ones before I get totally sidetracked, Sansevieria, the snake plant, there's a bunch of species. They're all great. They are all so hardy. They don't mind how much light you give them. Give them the water that's appropriate to their light level, which is not very much
Yeah.
water. Yeah, they're pretty great.
Yeah, and I think there's so much variation in the genus,
Yeah.
right? That you can have really different shapes. And I think just fundamentally, it's this plant that grows straight up. It's a different profile than a lot of the ones we've talked about.
It looks like blown glass swords crammed into a pot.
Yeah, or just, something, yeah, exactly, kind of crammed into a pot. You can get some that really are very like conical, right? Or just like cylindrical
Yeah.
almost. So
There's some that look like
there's some
pencils.
cool variation. They're truly everywhere. I walk
Yeah.
by them at the grocery store, few
They're
times a
easy to
week.
grow, they're easy to propagate, they're easy to keep in
Yeah.
your house. Then if you tend to be like a little heavy on the watering, get a peace lily. The Spathiphyllum genus has a lot of different sizes available, so you can get some to fit anywhere, but you know these from malls and like your grandma's house. I actually had one for years that a family friend gave to my grandfather when my grandmother passed away. And then he gave that plant to me, and I had it for years. And I was really sad when it finally died one day. I did everything I could to keep that plant happy, but sometimes like they just end.
Wait,
But
what kind of plant was this?
peace lily.
Oh,
And so now I always have a peace lily. And the one in my bedroom right now, it's getting heavy shade from fiddle leaf fig in an east window, but it's going to produce 4 flowers, which is always a thrill when it does. That's one of the few on this list that you actually grow for the blooms. Now, the last two that I'm going to mention, the Yucca gigantica, or gigantea, I believe, it's usually just sold as yucca cane, and you know it from like, it's just these woody looking canes that are crammed in a pot with like really spiky dramatic foliage on top. It looks a lot like a dracaena, but it's spikier, and they can almost survive outdoors over winter without protection here. I've grown ours on our balcony without protection for 3 years now, and our horrible, awful winter did kill back the active growth, but it's resprouting from the roots. So they're a pretty choice plant for here, and even Brian didn't kill it. And then the very last one is the ZZ plant, Zamioculcas zamifolia. We've talked about this one before. It's another aroid, but it's a plant that's just going to thrive no matter what you do to it for the most part. So all of these plants, they're going to be dependable choices no matter like what you're doing, as long as you make sure that you get the light level right. There's a few like little stipulations for each of them, but it's nothing that you can't kind of learn and practice.
yeah, and really chances are, if you kind of put these in or near a window or something, you're off to a good start at least.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the next little segment here. We're going to talk about some scenarios, like common scenarios.
Okay.
So what would you put in, how about, so, we've kind of talked about a standard windowsill. So what about shelving a little bit away from a window? Like maybe you have a bookcase, it's not in the window.
So as long as it gets some light that's fairly bright, you're gonna have a lot of choices.
So just to clarify that bit, so some light that's fairly bright usually will, to me, that will mean like a light, a room that's bright. Does it mean that the direct rays of the sun have to pass over it at some point in the day?
Yeah, I would say that the light should be strong enough that you can clearly read by it.
Yeah.
Like, I know that that's a really vague description, but here's kind of the little trick. Is your plant growing? Yes? Cool. Then it has enough light. Is it just not doing anything at all? Then it could use a little bit more.
Great rule of thumb.
Yeah, and like there are a lot of plants that will happily just sit there doing nothing in the dark for a long period of time, and they'll still look pretty decent while they're doing that. A lot of the plants on this list that I just shared are actually going to do that pretty well. But if they're actively like producing new leaves, new foliage, you can see them like being living organisms, your light is strong enough.
Yeah, and that's actually a great point to bring up, I think. I think it's good to call out that, yeah, is your plant happy or not? Is it growing, right? Like if your plant's growing, then you know it's happy. I think often people are like, "Oh, I'm not sure if it's doing well or not. I don't know if this is a bad sign," right?
Yeah.
Like one leaf turned yellow over here but that's a great measure is just if there's new active growth,
Yeah.
that's great.
And on the other side of that, sometimes plants go dormant. A lot of plants
Yeah.
have dormant periods. So don't be afraid if like suddenly all the leaves fall off of something. That might just be the sign that you're growing a deciduous plant indoors.
I mean, yeah, I would not tell you that that is usually an okay sign, but it
Yeah,
could be
you don't want many deciduous plants indoors.
dropping all leaves.
Yeah,
But
Vermont inside.
yeah,
But like there are definitely plants that will go through a period of decline. Then you stop watering them, keep them dry, and then they'll come back.
but
So
importantly, none of these really.
yeah, like
None of
nothing
these
that
have
we're
complex
talking about
seasons
here
that-
need that.
Yeah.
There are some plants that are really commonly kept indoors or that are usually sold for inexpensive prices that go dormant. We'll talk about those in a minute. Yeah.
So yeah, so we have the low light bookcase, okay, or not the low light, but
Yeah.
that one's like
So
sort of away.
Here are the plants that I would use for that. If you want something to kind of like fill out a shelf and look kind of bushy, I would pick one of the bushier philodendrons, like maybe Prince of Orange or Moonlight. You'll also have really good luck with any of the smaller snake plants. Like some of them are quite short. They'll do really well, at least for quite a while. If you want something that's going to drape and kind of spill over a bit, you can't do anything that's going to thrive better or easier than the pothos plant that we were talking about. There's also another epipremnum that is really popular on Instagram. It's called Cebu Blue, I believe. And that is related to the pothos, but instead of having green and gold variegation, it's just kind of like this powdery blue color, like kind of unnatural. It's like almost metallic.
Yeah, I think I've seen it, and that one's a little kind of hard to come by now, right?
Yeah, but it's becoming popular, and I have
But I mean, hey, you could grab an easy, incredibly cool plant.
yeah,
So
like
you
this
do
is
that.
one that if you start with a small one, it'll grow quickly in long vines, and then you can propagate those. I have a couple of pictures that I put on Instagram of some of the propagation that I have been doing recently. I've been really inspired by a bunch of fellow Instagram plant people, and so I have a lot of propagation happening. And then lastly, the Hoyas. Hoya may not bloom when the light is lower like that, but they'll at least grow nicely, and they have like gorgeous kind of twisty, wiry, shooting kind of looks to them with leaves that come out of these vines. So like it's a neat statement.
So just to really like complete the bookcase sort of thought here, when you are planting these, really all of these should require a pot with a tray, some drainage, right? Like
Yeah.
you might think about that when you're when you're putting it on it, don't be, tempted to have a closed vessel to like not get on any things. You might be making your life harder for some of these plants.
Yeah, the number one way to kill a plant is to have its roots sitting in water. A lot of plants don't mind having their roots wet, but they have to be in contact with air or else they'll just stagnate and then your plant will just look like hell because it has no roots anymore and it's going to die. Um,
So we
yeah.
would urge you to get a plant that has drainage, maybe get a dish that you like, right? And just make sure that it's not sitting in there, even if you're tempted to do that near your books or whatever.
Yeah,
Just,
some
as this is an easy plant list.
Now, the way that I do my plants on shelving, I have a lot of open shelving in my apartment, and I use cash pots for almost everything. And I use a lot of expressive
And a
plants.
cash pot is a closed pot.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
like
So
you
he's
take
not following my directions.
well, I'm not following them all the way, but I'm not planting the plant in a pot that has no drainage. I'm usually putting like some gravel or some expanded clay pellets in the bottom of a container that doesn't have holes. I'm setting the either plastic nursery pot or like the terracotta one that I put it in inside of that pot. So what it does, you water, the water drains away, the plant's not sitting in water, and then if it wants to, it can grow roots out of the bottom into the
Yeah.
expanded clay and sit in water if it wants. But the plant has made that deliberate choice, and the roots are also getting dried out after a while because
Yeah.
I'm not keeping the water high.
So that's a good clarification. Yeah, and I kind of do the same, but
The
you're
reason that I
right.
like to do this is because that way, in combination with using the cash pot method, like I can put a lot of water in there before it overflows. And if I use little saucers on bookshelves that are higher than I can see easily, I often will water too much and then ruin books, which I don't
That's
like to do.
yeah, that's a good catch actually. Okay.
Then the other two tricks that I use, I make sure that I use plants that are expressive about wanting water so that like if it's thirsty it wilts dramatically, so I'm like, fuck, I need to go water my neon pothos.
Yeah.
And then the other side of that is I find plants that are fine with wilting hard and popping back up, so I wouldn't do this with something that a single wilt would make it lose all of its leaves.
So none of these that we have in this list again,
Like, yeah, basically everything that we have listed is going to thrive in these conditions. You can have a pothos plant in a closed vessel with some drainage in the bottom,
absolutely.
water it real heavy, real hard, have it sitting in water for a while. It'll be fine, it won't rot. Once that water dries up and it dries out and it dries further and then the leaves flop over, and you water it again real hard. Like,
Yeah.
that's just kind of the way that I do a lot of those plants. And it cuts down on the fungus gnats as well, because fungus gnats need to have constantly moist soil for their reproduction. And so a lot of new gardeners get stressed when they see all these little black flies showing up. And it's because they're keeping their plants a little bit too wet and they're encouraging fungus gnats to propagate themselves.
So what about a baking sunny windowsill? Maybe you just have this, I know in Seattle, I know there are a lot of buildings that have this, right? You have
Yeah.
floor to ceiling windows maybe, and your apartment just like increases so much in temp during the day or something. Anyway, so in that spot in the window, what would be okay in those conditions?
So you're going to want to think more like desert plant than
Yeah.
tropical foliage because it's also going to be hard to keep the humidity high in those conditions.
Yeah.
So if you are really just like down with the cactus and succulents, like go nuts. That's going to be the best location for them. Bright, direct sun as much as they can get, giving them like the longest daylight hours that you can helps. And they're not going to mind if the humidity is really low. And they're also not going to be mind if they get really, really warm. And that might even be a really great aspect for them in the winter when it's naturally colder, darker. They're probably going to benefit from whatever amount of heat that builds up during winter days so that they are a little bit more stable in the winter months, which can be a little tricky for houseplants sometimes. If you wanted to do something though that was like kind of original and unique, I think that the Euphorbia mealy, which is called crown of thorns, that's a plant that you can grow in like a small pot. You can get large ones. That's a really striking plant that performs really well. Sometimes it'll go deciduous. but they may also stay green year round. And they have really beautiful blooms, and that's another one of the ones that blooms. I think that if you wanted to be a little bit more like, I don't know, fussy about it, you could hang sheer curtains over your windows. And in that case, then you could do things that wanted bright indirect light and they wouldn't burn as much, but they'd have to be ones that could tolerate heat. So, like the Dracaena would probably be fine. You'd probably also have some good luck with the Philodendron as well. And, like, it's really a pretty open list for you if you have those conditions because you can always apply more curtains to get less light.
Okay, so what about possibly the toughest environment? What about the bathroom?
Well,
I mean,
first
okay,
of all,
maybe you're lucky enough to have a skylight. Like I'll
yes.
assume that
Do
you
you have
know
a
you
window?
don't.
My biggest dream is to have like a lot of natural light in a bathroom one day because the bathroom is such a wonderful place
That's
to
where
grow
my mom
plants.
grows all her orchids.
Your,
Actually,
your
yes.
damn mom with her orchids.
Yes.
Yeah, she is benefiting from a few things there. One is that bathrooms give you really close access to water. So people tend to not forget to water their bathroom plants. They tend to get a more even watering schedule. You'll also have more regular humidity.
Yeah.
Obviously, like a bathroom is not going to be 80% humidity all the time unless you have problems with your internal air system. But plants like the humidity when you shower. In my dream world, I would have installed some like uh, LED lights over my shower, and then I'll just like hang orchids around the area above the tile because then I can just like spray them down with water when I shower, and they'll have the grow lights, and they'll be so lush and they'll be amazing, and all of my mounted plants will finally be growing in a space that's like appropriate.
Okay, so the Indestructible Easy Houseplant we recommend is a ceiling coated with orchids, right, in the
It's so
bathroom.
simple,
Okay,
guys.
I feel like we got on a tangent.
You're right.
It was a good one.
Sorry, thank
So
you for
now,
coming on my
that's
fantasy with
okay.
me. But if you have a bathroom with light, I think that you need to like congratulate yourself on your good fortune and pick up some alocasia. They are a really great aeroid that grow from a corm. And they have a tendency to drop leaves. They're a plant that frustrate a lot of indoor gardeners because if the humidity is not high, they don't produce new leaves and they don't hold many new leaves on a plant. So the way to get around this is to grow them in greenhouses and conservatories and Florida. And they like a bathroom if they have bright indirect light, but you can keep them like pretty humid. This is also a great place for begonias, which I think are just a consistently bitchy houseplant because they're so susceptible to a lot of like soot and mildews, and they like high humidity to perform well. Bromeliads are great in bathrooms because they're tolerant of lower light. They like to be like wetted down because their roots don't really absorb water.
So from the humidity, they'll get some of that. So,
Yeah, and you can also like literally like take your plant in the shower with you. Like,
so
yeah.
okay, you're talking about these stream bathrooms. What about the dark bathroom?
Well, the dark
What do you think?
bathroom, you need to just get yourself a really pretty vase, stop at the florist, and get like a monstera leaf once every couple of
That's the
months.
thing. So I mean, I wanted you to have some magic answer to this, but
Here's my
really, I
magic
tell
answer.
people
You
that too.
install grow lights in your
Yeah.
ceiling and then cover it in orchids.
Yeah, like I tell some friends who try this. I mean, I have a friend, a couple friends growing different things in the bathroom, and I'm just like, this is the hardest environment. I mean, it's going to get some incidental light, from like a whatever watt thing,
Well, that's not going
that's
to do
just
anything
not,
if
yeah,
you don't
if
have it on for
anything
like a
else.
10-hour light cycle.
Yeah, so I just feel like it's a bit of a death sentence for most plants unless you have some light source, wouldn't you say?
Well,
I mean,
yeah,
and
like
of course, we all see plants there. We
what
all see
Steven
them
has
kind of
said is
dying
politically
slowly.
true. A bathroom is a death sentence to most plants. In the same way that a dark room is a death sentence to most plants, all plants. Like, there's no plant that will thrive in a dark room. I'm so sorry about that.
Someone's gonna reach out with exceptions, but
Well, there are some
feel
like
like
like the I think it's called ghost flower now.
Well, yeah, aren't there some parasitic plants that just like a
Yeah,
flower will pop out of?
but you know what you need is
You
like
need a rotting log and you need the proper,
yeah,
like fungal growth.
yeah.
And so
So
that's,
unless you're keeping those beautiful white pipe-shaped wildflowers from the Pacific Northwest
does Home
forests,
Depot have that?
no, you can't grow these plants. They're in the rhododendron family, by the way, and
Wow.
blueberries. Yeah, weird.
Okay.
Yeah, but basically, like, if you have a bathroom with no lights, you need to do what I do and occasionally buy an orchid at Trader Joe's to keep on the counter while it's in bloom, and then you put it in a brighter light source when you can tell that it's dying because it's in a dark bathroom.
Yeah.
Or you get like some tropical foliage and put it in a vase, like our friend John does. Or you find out some grow light situation that you can rig up and try to get whoever else might use that bathroom to be on board with it.
Yeah. The positive part of this, if something died that you put in a bathroom that's dark once, it wasn't you.
Yeah,
Okay. It wasn't your fault.
it was your ignorance that was the fault.
Okay. That
But
one. Left that out.
no, but the thing that you really have good luck with though, if you have a well lit bathroom, is anything that likes more humidity than the average plant and doesn't mind being wet. So that would include all of the calathea and the related ones, like all the prayer plants. There are a lot of really great like little orchids that'll do well in the bathroom, arrowhead vines, tillandsia air plants. Like
Oh, air plants. Actually, that's a great one.
yeah, like
Yeah.
if you've got a bright bathroom, get yourself some air plants because a tillandsia is going to thrive in that condition. So, were there any other
No, I think
areas of a
I think
home?
we kind of hit the big ones there, right?
Yeah.
All right, so now for the plant people types, I guess you could say.
Okay.
So, what if you are a heavy waterer? Maybe you know that you've had some root rot in the past. Maybe you
Well, and this is the number one thing that kills houseplants is people
I've heard that too,
overwatering.
yeah.
Yeah. So if you are a person who kills plants because you water them too much, here are some really great choices for you. The arrowhead vine, which is a aroid, it's called syngonium. That is a plant that doesn't mind being pretty wet. You can even grow them in water or in like water with expanded pellets. The Chinese evergreen aglaonema is also really tolerant of overwatering. And I feel like there's no amount of water that is going to be too much for the Guiana chestnut. This is Pacria aquatica. You'll see them braided. It's like Chinese
Yeah.
money tree.
And it sits in water.
Yeah, like it is a plant of the swamp. So it doesn't mind if its roots are literally sitting in it. I think that a lot of these are going to, of course, prefer if they're not sitting in it. But just like I mentioned earlier, the peace lily, a lot of these plants are going to be pretty okay with like heavy watering as long as it's not absolutely chronic.
Okay, so what about a negligent waterer? You're like, oh, when's the last time I've watered that?
I
I don't
don't
remember
remember.
again.
Well, there are a lot of really good euphorbia, a lot of good cactuses. They do like to be watered, but if you're pretty forgetful, and especially if you get larger cactus, like if a big cactus isn't watered for a few months, it's not going to suffer as much as if a small cactus isn't watered for a
That's
few
a great
months.
point. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're like really bad at watering, I just suggest getting bigger plants for one. But it's going to be really successful if you get bigger plants that are really fine with lax watering schedule like aloe or the ponytail palm, which is not a true palm tree. It's a caudiform plant that kind of has like a grassy top. You'll also get really good luck with jade plants, which are really easy to care for. Crown of thorns that I mentioned earlier. A lot of the peperomia, even though they like higher humidity, they're pretty fine with having drier root systems. I don't know if I'd say that they're like super duper hardy, but they're one of the leafier ones that
And
are
just
tolerant.
just like people, just say you're gonna water every Monday or something, right? Can you do
Well,
that?
okay,
I'm not saying it's gonna cure all, but it's gonna cure the
two
3 months
things that I
of
try to
not.
never tell people to do when they're asking about like, well, tell me about what I should do for watering. I don't ever give anybody a volume of water, and I never give anybody a frequency of
Really?
watering. Yeah, like one of our friends is the kind of guy where he's like, I use 1 liter of water every 8 days. And to me, that,
Yeah, that doesn't work for me.
well, now
Like in my mind,
it works for him, but here's why it doesn't work for me. You can't control how warm your room is. You can't control how much sunlight your plant gets.
Yeah.
Like, let's say it's like a really cloudy, gray, cool period in August. Your plant isn't going to be using a lot of that water. It's not going to be evaporating actively out of the soil. So it's going to get too wet. If you have like a really, really hot, really bright, sunny period where everything is exploding with growth, the plants might get too dry because you're like, no, it has to be 1 liter every 8 days.
Yeah.
So, like, for me, I have not found a balance that works. Some people, this is totally successful, and I'm not going to, like, get on their case about that. But that to me, just scheduled prescribed watering means that you're not paying attention to the soil conditions.
Yeah, and okay, I get what you're saying. I don't be like, blindfold yourself, pour water in it every Monday. For me though, I think it's more like maybe checking it every Monday or something like that. You
Yeah.
still don't think that? Or
Well, I agree with you there. What I do is I have expressive plants placed throughout my plant collection. They're kind of distributed so that, like, I have little visual cues. If I don't think to go check something on a consistent schedule, which happens very easily to anybody, I might have a plant that just like dramatically like flops itself over, and then it's my little cue to, oh, I need to go water all the hanging plants in front of that window because like the one is really like cueing me into the fact.
yeah. So
But
okay, and we can
But
yeah.
ideally, like, what I would do is I would go around to each plant and I'd stick my finger like a couple knuckles deep into the soil, and I'd take it out and I'd be like, oh, well, that's like dry to the first knuckle. That means that I can go ahead and water today. Or then for another plant, know like, oh, she likes to stay permanently wet, so like the top is dry, so I'll just give her a little
Yeah.
sip.
And to give everyone a sense too, I think this is something that you'll just get a sense of when you know the plant.
This is annoying to say, but like, you'll learn this.
Yeah, this is like your mom just saying just a pinch of salt or
Yeah.
whatever. I think you
You
just
just
will
learn
know.
what that means.
Right, so you'll get a new plant, you'll understand when it's happy or not,
The way
kind
that
of the
I-
water level that it likes. Right?
Yeah, like my default watering is during the winter, I wait until the soil surface has been dry for a few days.
Okay.
And then in the active growing season, I water just as the top surface begins to look dry. So it's really just a visual assessment rather than like a touch one.
Yeah.
If I'm ever confused, I'll touch it because sometimes it's hard to tell the moisture of soil by glancing. But I'll also really pay attention to what the leaves look like. If they're glossy, if the cells are all like turgid, then you'll have like shiny, glossy foliage.
Okay, so in short, the answer is expressive plants for these people who maybe forget to water. Or bigger
Yeah,
cacti.
so, yeah, thank you for getting me back on topic. Plants that are tolerant of neglect, like cactuses and a lot of other succulents, larger plants, Sansevieria are really hardy, ZZ plants, Yucca, any of these ones that are going to bounce back, but it's nice if they let you know that they need a sip once in a while.
Yeah. Okay. So, I think those are kind of the two, right? Or like most typical people.
I guess the only other thing that I'd point out, some plant people really like plants that flower, and for a lot of indoor plants, the light isn't high enough. So I'm just going to name off some plants that if you do crave those indoor blooms, that I have had good luck with getting them to do that. I know I kind of bitch about begonias being a little bit finicky sometimes, but they're a blooming plant and they look great when they're doing it. Orchid cactus, if you don't mind giving them a little bit of a cooler fall chill outside, they have some of the most spectacular flowers of all the succulents. I think that those are probably a little bit bigger and harder than the African violet that a lot of people are into. I like them a lot better than African violets, but related to them are the Christmas cactus that are also a tropical epiphytic cactus. They also need that cooler rest. Some of the easiest plants to get to bloom, though, are going to be Columnia, which is the goldfish plant. There's a lot of different types of them. They're vining. They have beautiful leaves. Their flowers kind of look like goldfish, and they're in shades from like deep, deep red to bright yellow. So goldfish plant, they're really dependable. The crown of thorns that I've mentioned has beautiful little flowers that range from white to red with like pinks and oranges. And then I think that probably my favorite of them, just for like dependability indoors, is the peace lily that I've already talked about. But those are going to be great for flowering, and same with phalaenopsis that I think most people can have success with.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's kind of like all the groups that we can think of different kinds of plant daddies.
What do you think absolutely won't succeed in a home environment or won't succeed in a typical kind of beginner home environment?
Yeah, so most ferns, like anybody who wants a maidenhair fern, should either get like an Edwardian case, like a terrarium to put it inside of,
Oh, yeah.
or they should get one of the hardy ones and grow it in their garden. Most of them are really, really tricky to get the water level right because they will not tolerate drying and they will also rot if they stay too wet. A lot of them need high ambient humidity and do not like drafts. Like I have had a lot of trouble with ferns. So besides like the bird's nest fern and the staghorn fern, I don't recommend ferns. The begonias that are grown for their foliage rather than their flowers tend to be trickier. I have found that a lot of them are very susceptible to like mildew and molds. They randomly die.
So, sorry, were there any foliage begonias on these lists that you can remember?
Well, the Rex begonia.
Rex, okay.
Yeah. So this is kind of a weird loose term. There are Rex begonias. There are some non-Rex begonias grown for their foliage. It's kind of like this clumpy family that, like, you'll know it when you grow it because it'll die on you. Is how I would kind of treat the Rex begonias.
Have fun.
This is one of the most challenging rated plants according to plantsorsstrangepeople.com, which is one of my favorite sources. That expert horticulture person is just like not sold on the Rex begonias. I also mentioned that I think that cheap palm trees, they are easy to produce in Florida. They are impossible to keep alive everywhere else, especially as a houseplant. Any like little flower in a pot that has that like crinkly mylar around it that is sold as a florist, like so you can like give someone a chrysanthemum or a poinsettia, they're gonna die. Like that poinsettia, good luck with it. It's never gonna bloom like that again, unless you like get yourself a greenhouse and a light schedule that is like to the moment precise.
Yeah, and that's cruel because it seems so unpretentious, right? Maybe the wrapper or the commonness of it or something.
But like there are chrysanthemums that do well in gardens. The beautiful, like exotic looking ones with the huge heads of flowers, and you'll sometimes see those at florists. Those are like cranked up on so many plant growth hormones and like specific schedules that they won't live. You'll also usually find like azaleas and hydrangeas, cyclamen and kalanchos, roses, like anything that are planted like that don't belong indoors, or they're not going to be great indoors. I say this because azaleas are garden plants. They need brighter light. They need dependable moisture. They need good humidity. That's why they do so well in the Pacific Northwest. They're just not going to do well indoors. The cyclamen are a plant that are from the Middle East, and they grow best during the winter when it's fairly cool. But then when it gets hot during the summer, they go dormant. So in our cool winter, it's a little bit too cold for them outdoors, like permanently year round. But you'll see them outside a lot because they make good like temporary, like wintertime plantings. But they go dormant when you bring them inside. So like the florist cyclamen does not like to be bought and kept indoors. The flowering kalanchoe, kalanchoe, I'm now learning.
See, I think it's kalanchoe. I wasn't gonna like, I'm not gonna correct you all the time or
Well,
something like Metz Miles's role. But
yeah,
I think it's like I
this
did take a year of Latin, and just a lot of those sounds aren't there.
This is one of those cases that I think that we can all appreciate, where you've read a word a lot, and a lot of your training on like plants comes from your reading. So, like on the ledge that we talked about earlier, she laughed about this herself because she knows how she says these words, but I think that she says Kalanchoe because I think that this was a debate that they had on one of the episodes I listened. So, but there's a flowering variety of it that always looks like hell to me. And that plant is so commonly found in like abandoned, unwanted plant areas of offices. I think you should just stay clear
And
of
was
that.
this on any of the lists that you saw? This one?
Yeah, this is one that people like would use as like a photo example of a succulent.
Oh, interesting.
But that was kind of like a one-off. That was kind of a strange thing.
Oh, okay.
And then, like I said, roses, they belong in a garden. Like all of these plants that belong in gardens do not want to do well when you pot them up indoors. I also think that if you have a succulent that is planted in a container without drainage holes, that is just a sign that it's meant to die because,
It's an extreme challenge, I think.
yeah,
I don't know why you would do that to yourself.
like even if you don't
It's
water
like-
it very often at all, the roots are still going to suffer if they don't have drainage. Even if there's no water to drain, the roots don't like that closed environment.
Yeah, I'm kind of racking my brain. I'm like thinking if there's any like counterexample that I can think of. Not really.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
basically, what I don't think that you should try if you want something indestructible: ferns, foliage begonias, cheap palm trees, flowering florist plants that belong in your garden, and succulents that are planted in containers meant to be cute but that don't have drainage holes to allow ample water-free root space. But yeah, so I think that these are really like my best thoughts about what we went through in these lists. Do you have any thoughts that you want to add to this, Stephen?
No, I mean, I think for all of these, there are, not all of these maybe, but for some of these, there are some exceptions. I think, like, I'm just thinking Kalanchoe. I have some Kalanchoe that have been growing indoors, and I'm thinking.
Well, I feel like I need to actually now correct what I was saying. I'm literally just talking about the flowering florist Kalanchoe, because there are many other species that are really dependable and are really fantastic plants, and one of them even showed up regularly. It was it's one that they call panda plant, but
Tomentosa.
yeah, Kalanchoe tomentosa. So,
Okay.
yeah, there are always going to be exceptions. Plants that weren't on these lists that I think deserve space. I love the lady palm. I think it is a really fantastic plant for indoor spaces. The fiddly fig didn't really show up very often on them. In fact, I think it was mentioned on 4 of the 10 lists. Yeah, so just because a list mentions a plant doesn't mean that it's definitive proof of your potential for success. And just because you don't see a plant on a list doesn't mean that you should steer clear of it.
So how about this? Do you have any favorite for each of these categories, maybe? So we have a couple categories. Flowering indoor tropicals. Do you have any favorite easy one that you would send people to?
Well, I think that the Phalaenopsis is going to be like your best bet for indoor flowering. I also think that, like I said before, that the goldfish plant is going to be really dependable. And then a lot of the aroids will bloom. Some of them have showy flowers, like the anthuriums and the peace lilies. Some of them have less showy
You're
flowers.
only allowed to pick one, Matthew.
Oh. I'm so heartbroken.
I'm now
Okay.
trying to make, yes, I'm like
Okay.
trying to add this extra challenge to see what would happen.
Now that there are rules
like
imposed
now,
on me,
this is
and
happening in real time.
Okay.
You have to choose.
Okay, Phalaenopsis orchid.
Wow, okay. That's an interesting choice, actually.
Because they're so dramatic. It's like a really high reward.
And really, and yeah, I kind of agree, because really often you can buy it with the blooms, and the blooms will stay.
Yeah.
So even the easiness factor is there.
And if you mount that plant and decide that you want to go to the trouble to water it a few times a week, like that is a statement that you are making with your plants.
Okay, so what about a jungle vibes?
Okay, my very
Number
favorite
one choice, easy jungle vibes plant.
Monstera deliciosa. Easy.
Okay, easy. All right,
Yeah.
interesting. What about desert minimalist.
Oh,
See, someone for that baking window. Like,
I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go with. It's called cowboy cactus a lot, but I think it's Euphorbia ingens. It looks like a
I
cactus,
have to
but
look
it's
this
actually a
up.
euphorbia. It's beautiful. It deals with slightly lower light than a lot of other cactus
Oh,
similar
that's a
species.
that's a good choice, and that's very. I think that's around, but it's
Yeah.
not everywhere. Kind of
Yeah.
one.
It's a plant that you'll recognize, but when you walk into
That's a very good choice, actually.
someone's home with it, they're not going to be like, "Oh yeah, I saw those at IKEA."
You can also buy sizable specimens, I think, for non-insane
I
prices,
think they're pretty
right?
quick growing.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh, I've never
so
had one.
like it makes it easy to get a good sized plant.
All right. What about, broadly cool foliage?
I'm really tempted to just say Begonia maculata righty because it has such gorgeous like speckled leaves,
Hmm.
but that one is a little bit it's a little bit like overdone in the social media game right now,
Okay.
and it is my favorite begonia. I think it's fantastic, but I'm gonna say Hoya carnosa, but the
Wow.
variegated one.
Okay.
Like the older leaves are beautiful cream and green,
Yeah.
and then the younger ones have splashes of like pink and magenta. It's a really striking
Wow.
plant when it's in active growth.
Okay. And what about unusual plants?
I think that one of the weirdest plants on this list has. Well, I'm actually just going to review my list just to make sure that.
Because this is tough. Because I think
Yeah.
for this list, often easy tends to be more
A
not
lot of these
ordinary,
are
but just
honestly
more.
pretty, like, pedestrian, but there's nothing wrong
Well,
with, like, pedestrian houseplants.
well, fine. They're pedestrian to someone who's super experienced, right?
Well,
I think
I'm
that's
just.
true. Like you can.
The defining thing that I'm going to use to define pedestrian is can you find this when you walk yourself into a Home Depot?
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. When there is nothing wrong with this. Most of these plants I have. Um, but I think that the one that I'm going to have to settle on as like a weird, interesting plant, Cycas revoluta. Revoluta? The
Okay.
sago palm.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
so this is a
I hear
cycad.
more and more about these recently, actually.
Yeah,
Like
they're kind
people
of having
thinking
a
about these.
moment, and like most things, I'm going to say that I was into these before everyone, which actually is a lie because they were around before the dinosaurs. Um, they are these ancient plants, and I just bought one of these recently, Dayun edule, which is related to the sago palm. They're not palm trees. They are like these ancient palm-like trees, and the sago palm has a tight, small little form. They can grow large, but for an indoor plant, they're going to do really, really well with kind of irregular watering. They don't mind being kept fairly moist if it's very warm, very bright. If you grow them in lighter shade that they'll tolerate just fine, you shouldn't
Mm,
water them often. Buy the size that you want because that's the size it'll be for a real long time.
okay. I'm reading about these now. I would just add that sago palm is very toxic to pets, and I mean a lot of these plants are, but
Yeah.
there's a whole paragraph about these are how these are particularly toxic. So maybe
Well, I
careful with
mean,
the
like,
rabbits.
just be thoughtful. I don't have one of these, and I have had plants that are extraordinarily toxic. I actually do have plants that are extraordinarily toxic. And because Brian and I have three house rabbits, three box turtles, and a parrot, all of whom are very likely to, like, consume things that they encounter, we've had to be very thoughtful about what access is available to what plants where.
But hey, that just makes it more unique,
It makes it
doesn't
more
it?
exciting.
So deadly.
Yeah, I don't have anything that's like deadly, deadly.
But okay, yeah, those are interesting choices. I am surprised by some of them.
Which ones?
Gosh, so I think um I was a bit surprised honestly by the flowering one. I thought you would choose something sort of more like balanced in the sense that it would like, oh, a foliage plant that's going to bloom reliably. And I mean, I guess you're getting that with the
So
orchid, but
I'm
I
I
make
I will add like an addendum to this. Hibiscus is great. Like hibiscus plants will bloom really reliably when the weather is nice and warm. They like to stay pretty warm. They like really bright light. They like to stay pretty wet, but they don't like to stand in water. Like this is a
mm,
true tropical. And I have one hibiscus, and it's a species one. It's one of the natives of Hawaii instead of like that
mm,
common hybridized one from China. Um, and it's a great plant, but I didn't include it because I think that one, it wasn't anywhere on these lists. Like nobody recommended it. But I didn't
mm.
even think to bring it up because I think that they are a plant that are better suited for patios and like warmer outdoor spaces.
So
They're at their best when they're shrubs.
okay.
And a phalaenopsis you can grow in an 8-inch
So this is
pot.
not like dethroning the Phalaenopsis for you.
No,
So
no, no.
no.
But I'm saying that
Yeah.
if you want an alternative to a phalaenopsis that
Yeah.
is perhaps a much more reliable bloomer,
Okay.
the flowers last for a much shorter period of time, like usually a day or 2 days at the most, but it produces many of them on the tips of new growth every year. So it's
Okay.
like plants that produce flowers on new growth are some of the most reliable because that means that any growing that it does that year should bloom if it's happy
Okay.
enough. But no, I'm not going to unthrone the Phalaenopsis. I just think that I should point
Mm,
out that that's a nice one. But that's
interesting.
interesting, though, now that I think about it, most flowering plants that you're going to grow for their flowers require more trouble. They usually need some kind of routine when it comes to fertilizer. The seasonal temperatures are sometimes critical. The sunlight is usually higher, or the
That
needs for
seems,
sunlight.
yeah, that's been my experience. And really, I'm not, a flower focused grower necessarily. I mean, I have some orchids, and orchids to me are mostly about flowers, but otherwise, I don't have many. And that's always my sense as someone who doesn't really grow for that reason. I'm kind of like, okay, a flower. I'm like, all right, whoa, I'm gonna have to mess with my light temperature. Maybe they're gonna want some hormone half the time. Like, it
Well,
just seems
I
like a
have never
lot.
added hormones to
You've
my
never
plants
done
to make
that? And
them to
see, I didn't know
flower.
that. I just hear
Well,
that,
this
and
is
I'm
a
kind of
thing that you
like,
can do, but like the goal that I am trying to help our listeners achieve is to be able
yeah,
to just like water and fertilize their plants occasionally in the right
mm,
brightness and like get flowers and not have to like inject plant growth hormones or something.
yeah. So I guess it's a good thing to call out. So yeah, maybe you can't just have a flower machine necessarily in your house. It's going to require a little bit more.
There are definitely some that are like that. None that I just happen to think about. None that were on this list,
Okay.
or on these lists of lists.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So yeah, so to summarize, okay, I feel like we kind of sliced and diced these lists for you. We came up with ours. I would say my read of this is that it largely matched the lists. I mean, I wouldn't say like, oh, it's exactly the same, but it was nothing like we read this and we were shocked by how wrong they all were. It wasn't quite like
there
that,
were a
right? It
few
was
that I was
like,
like, "Stop putting
yeah,
ivy on."
yeah, like like there was some bits
Yeah,
like
you don't
that.
even mention how to grow it.
But yeah, but overall, I think we agreed, right?
Yeah, I actually feel like they came up with like really thoughtful suggestions. A lot of the places seemed to want to list plants that were both tried and true dependable as well as some unique and original ones that they weren't seeing in a lot of places. So I was really happy with the diversity of the recommendations that uh, the Pinterest sourced sources recommended to us.
Yeah, I think with any of these, like you can think about some of these suggestions as categories too. Like when you're ready to take maybe a step beyond the recommendation,
Yeah.
right? You feel like, oh, well, there's this plant that's on the list. Maybe something that's very related. Maybe that would be like a logical next step for you if you wanted to take something a little bit different. And there's always, reading that you can do about care differences. But maybe that's an avenue if you want to grow from this list too.
Yeah, it's always useful to kind of listen to what other people are saying and doing about their
Mm-hmm.
growing. So, to help make this information a little bit less listy, because if we had a quarter every time we said the word list tonight, we have put together some lists that are going to be available on our website. And they're going to be basically like just the names with a link to either like a growing source or a Google image search of those plants so that you can see what we recommend without any reservations to anybody at any entry point to this hobby. Then we'll have the ones that we think are fantastic if you want a little bit more of a challenge but would still like to be successful and get your participation trophy. And then the plants that we think that you're just going to set yourself up for some failure because they're ones that we have.
Yeah, so I think we'd love to hear feedback about this list. If you're trying these things, if you're an experienced grower and you have utterly different or, the same thoughts about this, be great to hear any suggestions or feedback.
Something that I always love is hearing from somebody like, oh my god, I can't grow this. And it's just like something that even when I rip it out, it somehow sprouts back in all my pots and nothing I do gets rid of it. But then, like, on the other hand, everyone's like, oh, this is so easy. And meanwhile, I cannot keep an arrowhead vine alive.
Yeah. So, really, I think that's a good sort of parting thought is that, some people just don't have luck with certain plants. I mean, hopefully there's one on this list that you can try that will work for you, but maybe just move on to the next. If you can't get X to grow, like one of these, just, don't beat yourself up too bad.
By the time that you're on your third maidenhair fern, I think you need to really question your choices.
That's right.
No, we kid. Yeah, so in addition to what we're going to be having on plantdaddypodcast.com, you should also just take a look at the Pinterest board because y'all know that I'm really into it. And we made a board specifically with our favorite indestructible houseplants. And it's a great place to look to get some of these plants that we've talked about. And I've sorted them by the ones that you're going to have just easy success. Just like we said, those categories of recommended without reservation, recommended if you want a little bit more challenge, and then just don't buy these. So hopefully you'll be able to go take a look, see those. If you're interested in the sources that we used, there's another board that is just the 10 sources that we compiled to discuss this data. So, yeah. And once again, please don't forget to go onto our social media, follow, like, subscribe, all those things. We're just going to keep begging you until we feel like enough people have listened to us.
Yeah, so when we have, 100 million, then we'll stop.
Is that
right?
daily downloads?
Something impossible.
Okay.
We're not gonna stop.
Yeah. Okay. 100 million daily
No further
downloads.
questions.
Yeah. Okay, well, this has been Plant Daddy Podcast. Thank you for listening. And, yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe, blah, blah, blah. If you like what you've heard, we would love a 5-star rating, but we would love for you to be in touch with us, which you can do at plantdaddypodcast@gmail.com. You can also look out on our social media for any little supplements that we do to this, like our plant lists. And all of this can be found online at plantdaddypodcast.com. We are looking forward to tuning in next time. Anything else, Stephen?
I think that's it.
All right. Well, thanks for listening and happy growing.
Thanks.